Welcome to the virtual Hudson River Museum on this beautiful, crisp, bright February day. I see some people who were here at our opening the other night. Welcome back. Welcome back.
I'm sure they wanted to come back and hear more from Richard and Guillermo.
Let's see. Okay.
Do you know how many people are signed up, Olivia, so that we know how many people we're expecting?
We had 51 last time I checked.
Okay.
Or I guess at the end of checking.
Okay.
We'll start in just a minute, everyone. We're just waiting for more people to come in.
Yeah, it takes a little bit.
Saying that for the benefit of our guests mostly, but also for the participants.
Okay. All righty.
So I will just say, you're in the right place, everyone. Welcome to our Collaborators in Conversation with Richard Misrach and Guillermo Galindo. And as soon as it seems like most of our guests have arrived, we'll get started.
Yep. Let's see, what time is it? I like to give people a little bit of leeway.
Yeah, I was at the museum yesterday for a while, and there were a lot of people actually at the museum in the exhibition. Yeah, in fact, you'll see a couple of them because I took some pictures down in the gallery.
That's so great.
Got the backs of some people. Yeah. And I also, just so you know, Sarah Linda and everybody else, for our guests, I'll tell you, if you come to the museum in person, we actually have a map at the end of the exhibition, and we invite you to leave your own migration story of yourself or your family on a world map. And I left one of mine yesterday, and I took a picture for you, Sarah Linda, so we can see the ones that are there already.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I've been curious about that, and the exhibit itself, which is quite immersive, is also ends up being interactive in that way. There are certain overarching questions that we ask people to consider, as well as to share their stories on this map. And this program also is interactive, and I think I don't see anybody else in the waiting room. So
yeah, it's 2:05, so I think you could start introducing the program.
Alrighty. Well, so we've been chatting away here. I've been chatting with Laura Vookles, who is the chair of our curatorial department at the Hudson River Museum, and I'm Sarah Linda Lichtblau, director of education at the museum, and it is our pleasure to be here today with you, with our colleague Olivia Cipriano, and our guests Richard Misrach and Guillermo Galindo, just to give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about today and where. Olivia, if you would like to advance to the next slide, that would be great. Here we are at the Hudson River Museum. Of course, today we are coming to you virtually from the Hudson River Museum. And the program is entitled Collaborators in Conversation, Richard Misrach and Guillermo Galindo. Photographer Richard Misrach and sculptor and composer Guillermo Galindo today are going to discuss the individual and shared paths that have over the years led them to combine their bodies of work inspired by the Mexican-American border region into an exhibition that conveys the human impact of the immigrant's journey. How did Border Cantos' sonic border come to be? What was the organic process through which the artists went, together with the organizations that were involved in its development? How did they come to fill what I see as the emptiness of the desert with really a spiritual sound? This talk between the artists will be moderated by my colleague Laura Vookles, as I said, chair of the Curatorial Department. And at the end, please stay for the Q&A with the artists. And in the course of the conversation, we ask that you put your questions and comments in the chat. And at the end, Olivia will be moderating that chat.
Sarah Linda,
Yes.
maybe Luis wants to summarize what you just said.
There's one other thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Luis, okay, and introduce Luis. I did want to let you know that the support for this program was provided through the generosity of our partner, Art Bridges, and it is closed captioned in English. If you click on the line transcript at the bottom, that will enable you to see the subtitles. But we are really pleased to be able to offer the program in both English and Spanish with simultaneous interpretation, thanks to our wonderful partner, Luis Lopez, who will be translating. And Luis, would you like to hop on and go through your instructions for how to avail yourself of this service?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes a todas y todos. I'm going to give the explanation in Spanish first, and then I'll catch you up in English. Today's program, however, is going to be in English, so you won't need interpretation unless one of our speakers decides to switch into Spanish, but I don't think that's part of the plan, so I'll give the explanation in Spanish. Buenas tardes, soy Luis López, su intérprete para la sesión de hoy. Si están conectadas y prefieren escuchar en español a esta sesión, pueden mirar, cuando termine de hablar yo, van a habilitar en la base de su pantalla de Zoom, verán que aparece un globito terráqueo, ¿no? Como un circulito, y si tocan ahí, esa es para conectar la función de interpretación, seleccionen español o Spanish, y no tienen que hacer nada más. Y entonces cuando estén hablando en inglés podrán escucharme a mí interpretándolo al español.
Okay.
Y allá vamos. También pondré unas notitas en el chat para darles las instrucciones por escrito, pero seguimos adelante. All right, and we're all set.
Okay, thank you so much, Luis. Thank you very much. Here is, I think I went through most of our instructions. As I said, you are muted upon entry. So, but your cameras are still on unless you turn them off. And please use the chat feature to type your questions and comments. We do want to hear from you. At this point, I am very pleased to turn the program over to my colleague, Laura Vookles, chair of the Curatorial Department, who will introduce our guests. Laura, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Sarah Linda. I will do that in a second. I just wanted to point out that after I introduce Guillermo and Richard, we do have a slideshow that is prepared that we may or may not get to all of it. It's more to spark conversation between the artists and also let you see what the exhibition looks like at the museum, and also, well, some other surprises. So Guillermo Galindo is an experimental composer as well as a creator of sculptural artworks that are working instruments. His interpretations of concepts such as musical form and notation, sonic archetypes, and sound generating devices span a wide spectrum of artistic works performed and exhibited throughout the United States, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. He has composed 2 symphonies, Ome Acate, premiered in Mexico City in 1997, and Trade Routes, commissioned by the Oakland East Bay Symphony Orchestra and Chorus in 2006. His operas include 2 major works, Califas 2000, with text and performance by MacArthur Fellow Guillermo Gomez Peña, and Decreation Flight Cherries, with text by MacArthur Fellow poet Anne Carson. Guillermo has been a Moore visiting artist at Stanford University and a distinguished visiting scholar at Rollins Cornell Arts Museum. I've been an admirer of Richard Misrach's work since the 1990s. He began his Desert Cantos series over 40 years ago and has been photographing the American Southwest ever since. He is the recipient of 4 National Endowments for the Arts Fellowships. In addition to the Border Cantos book, he has several other publications published by Aperture. His work is in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and many more. Richard is one of the most influential photographers of his generation. He helped pioneer the renaissance of color photography and large-scale presentation. And you will see some of these photographs in the slideshow, and you'll have to come to the museum if you want to see how truly immersive that they are. So why don't we move on in the slides, Olivia? I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a sense of what the exhibition looks like at the museum. I mean, this exhibition, Border Cantos, Sonic Borders, was first presented at the San Jose Museum of Art and at the Amon Carter Museum, and has since been shown at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and is being organized and circulated by Art Bridges. So it's been a little bit different in every space. When you come to the Hudson River Museum, which some of you may know this very well, you enter on our upper level and you look down into our main galleries. So this is a view that I took yesterday, looking down into the exhibition. You'll see there were some visitors there. I was glad to see a lot of visitors there. If you want to show the next slide. And then this is the title wall and the beginning of the exhibition. I have some more slides with details of these artworks. And this is looking in the other direction down in the gallery. So next slide. So I wanted to start by asking you, Guillermo, to say a little bit about the genesis of this project for you, and here, as with a couple of other slides in the exhibition, in the slideshow, I'm showing some pieces that aren't at the Hudson River Museum, like this gigantic angel exterminator, which is a piece of the wall, I believe. How did you come to acquire this object?
Yes, I didn't have much time at some point to go too often to the border. So Richard was there for months and months, and he was very generous in sending me photographs of things that could be useful, and I would send him requests. And at some point I said, can we have a piece of the border? And and he said,
so Richard threw this on his truck?
No, Richard will explain you later, but let me just finish, and he can explain better. So it seems like this type of wall is the one that was used as landing strips for helicopters in Vietnam and Afghanistan. It was the old wall, and this was discarded. It was found discarded, and I have no idea how it got bent like that. It's very thick and very heavy, and it's probably super difficult to bend it. But Richard can tell you a little more how he carried it and put in the truck or whatever.
So it was bent when you found it? It was already in this shape?
Yeah, it was bent, yeah. And that's why I call it Exterminating Angel, because it looks like the wings of an angel. And it's also a reference to Luis Buñuel movie, surreal movie with the same name.
And I think you have a mallet in your hand, right? Because you hit it like a gong. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I tried different mallets. First, I was trying one of those like rubber hammers. But when I hit it the first time, the handle broke right away. The hammer broke. So I found these thick mallets that are used for, I think, for carving wood, and they work really well because they have a very thick. That's part of the experimentation with the instruments, to find the right thing to activate it with, and etc.
Richard, do you want to chime in?
Sure. So yeah, so part of the fun of working with Guillermo is we would go back and forth via emails, and that's what people do today, right? And he, at some point he said, you know, if we can get a piece of border wall, and of course that was impossible. That said, at some point I'm driving along the border and I saw this section of wall, and as Guillermo was explaining, the wall over the years has been built with different materials. And one of the first iterations were recycled Vietnam War landing pads for helicopters. And that's what this particular section is part of that. And I found this section bent like this along the border wall in the dirt. And I stopped to look at it. And then the Border Patrol came up and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, actually, I would love to get this piece of garbage out of here. Would that be okay?" And he said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so, but then I had no way to do it. It was way too heavy. I couldn't lift that. So I went back to the little town nearby and had lunch at a seniors luncheon. And I mentioned out loud that I was trying to figure out how to get this section of wall back to California or Northern California. And somebody said, "Well, I can do it." And I met this guy. I forgot his name. It's been a little while, but he said, "I can just pick it up in my truck." And I said, "Great." And he followed me up there, and he literally, and I took photographs of him with my cell phone, kind of wielding it into the back of his truck, and he tied it down. And so we got in the back of his truck, and then we had to figure out how to drive it, up from Southern California desert to Northern California. So I hired a friend of another friend to put in their truck and bring it up, and we got it up there. And it was just, and then we brought it into my studio, and then actually some architects, Marcy Wong and Don Logan, offered to help kind of design sort of a larger structure to hold this. And the other thing I would say about it is everything in this construction, and we're just seeing a close-up of Guillermo performing this, and actually he was practicing with the mallets in my studio. Those pieces of lumber were brought back from the wall. I found lumber that was used in the construction of the wall. We would bring that back. Everything except for the mallets are, even the chains that are holding, which you can't see, it's dangling from, was a Border Patrol chain that used to drag tires along the border. So everything I bring back to the border, and then Guillermo would create this montage that had symbolic meaning, and he explained this symbolism. But it was pretty mild.
I feel like we've gotten ahead of ourselves a little bit. Maybe you all should first explain how you met each other and started working together.
At this time, I'm gonna make Guillermo do it because he always makes me do it.
Well, right now he's muted. Yeah, you need to come back on, Guillermo.
Okay, you want to tell you how we met?
I
Yeah.
want you to.
Okay. So I was already working in sonic devices for Quinteto Latino. I was running a quintet, and I had my first 3-4 sonic devices from the border after going to Laredo. And I met this guy, Daniel Alarcon. He's a writer, and he was very excited with my sonic devices, and he said, "You want to present it with me in Pop-Up Magazine?" So I presented my instruments. He wrote a text, and we presented there, and Richard happened to be in the audience. And 2 weeks after, Richard contacted us. We went to his studio, and I didn't know what we were getting into, but it was like, it's history after that, because he was working every day in the project for about 2 or 3 years until it was presented the first time at the San Jose Museum. And I didn't know the scope. Actually, Richard kept telling me, "You don't know how big this is going to be." And
Wow.
see.
I mean, Olivia, I think, did we skip past quickly the picture at the beginning of the selfie at the border? Can we go back to that for a second?
Of course we can. Just give me a moment.
Because I love that picture. Because didn't you say, Richard, that the Border Patrol is approaching?
Yeah, so one of the things that happens a lot when I was photographing is I would be out photographing quietly, just in the middle of nowhere, because much of where the wall goes is in the middle of nowhere, just open land, grazing land, cows, things like that. And inevitably, though, there's ground sensors as well as drones and other kinds of and video cameras. But the ground sensors let the Border Patrol know if somebody's there, and they always come rushing in when I'm photographing. So we were out there, Guillermo and I, and we were actually taking some pictures of each other. And sure enough, the next thing I know, way down, it's actually a sequence. There's 3 pictures of way in the distance. You can see the Border Patrol truck, and they come closer and closer. And then, of course, they want to find out what we're doing. And so I had a selfie stick, which I was experimenting with that. I was taking some pictures. So I did a sequence of this Border Patrol agent coming up to check out who we were.
If we get to the end, I have the other picture that you sent. Why don't we go ahead, Olivia? And okay, so basically I started with showing the angel exterminator image, but this is the first image that you took that got you started on this particular project, right, Richard?
Yes. So in 2004, I've been working in the desert for years, and this was shot with an 8x10 view camera, and I just travel around, wander around to see what I discover. And what I discovered in 2004, I saw these blue barrels with flags coming out of them in the middle of nowhere. And at first I thought maybe they were for off-road vehicles, like a race or something like that. And I just photographed it and I put it away and I didn't even think about it. It was only many years later that I discovered that these were placed out there by humanitarian groups. There's different groups. One's in California. This was in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. There's different, often religious groups. They put out water because they feel like, people shouldn't come into the desert, even coming over the border and suffer these terrible conditions. It gets very hot. You can get up to 110, 120 degrees. So inside the blue barrel, it says agua. It's a little hard to see, but it says agua on the cover. And then inside there's usually 4 to 6 gallon jugs of water in there. And they're spread out at, vast differences, but equally, so that, depending on when people are walking, they'll eventually run into them. So I didn't get the meaning of that until later. And then I just wanted to say something about the portrait of me real quick. That's actually a film still from the filmmaker Will Hart, and should say courtesy Will Hart. But that was done 2019, I think, or later. This was after the project where we worked on a film, and that's actually just a still from the film.
Thank you for letting us know that, because I don't think that we knew that. I'm looking for something to write a note. I'll have to make it later. Could we see the next slide, Olivia? So when you might have seen it in a glimpse when I showed the view of the exhibit, but I just wanted to point out that in the exhibition, there is this map which shows the entire borderline, and your photographs actually traverse the entire length of the border. I noticed that they go all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, and some of the ones from Brownsville are near the Gulf of Mexico, all the way to San Diego. Do either of you want to say anything about visiting the border? Anything else than you said so far?
I leave it to Richard.
Okay, so yeah, since I did a lot more of just traveling along the border, so it's it's almost 2,000 miles. There's about 680 miles of actual wall, and so what I would do is I would just on different trips, and I did this over several years. I actually started in earnest around, even though the first picture is from 2004, I began in 2009 methodically going. And so I would photograph in the California border. Then I would maybe another time fly to El Paso and drive down and photograph along the Texas border and so on. And, I would do like 2-3 week trips just exploring. And eventually I did the whole border. I think the biggest, I mentioned this the other day, but I think it's a really important point, is that all these towns are so different. Their communities are so different. It's not, I think the general public, and including myself, when I first started the project, you have almost a stereotype in your mind of what a border town is like. Well, there's big cities, there's small towns. The different communities have different relationships with each other. They have different languages. They have different cultural relationships. They have different monetary and business relationships. It's actually quite fascinating, but couldn't be more different. Tijuana is really different from Jacumba, which is very different from Brownsville, which is very different from El Paso, and so on. And I think that was a major revelation for me, that we tend to simplify, oversimplify, and stereotype places.
That's really been an eye-opener for me too, even from your exhibition. Could we have the next slide, please? So I wanted to say, invite both of you to say a little bit about the wall itself, because it has such a long history and such almost a strange history. And this is the strangest photograph of all, I think.
Well, I will talk about this one because I photographed it twice. In 2013, I photographed it the first time. And I assumed that, oh, they're building the wall here. This is in Los Indios, Texas. And I figured, they've just started building, and it's under construction, and eventually it'll extend out in both directions. There might be a sliding gate or something like that. And I'm actually on the Mexico side of the wall, as if you could tell the difference, right? And so what I did is I figured, in 2015, I went back there. I wanted to see how it had been built out. And the only thing that had changed was there was grass around it. And while I was photographing the second time, the Border Patrol came up to me in a big flurry, and they didn't arrest me, but they made me go to the Border Patrol headquarters to check out who I was and all that. But the guy was really hostile, and I said, so tell me, why is this wall like this? Why is this here? He says, well, it keeps people, forces people to one end or the other where we can catch them, And I said, but look at this wall, it's not big enough. And it was like a surreal, absurd discussion, because it obviously is a dysfunctional wall. This probably cost tens of thousands of dollars to build that, which is just completely functionless, but of taxpayers' money. So this became kind of a perfect symbol, it's like a found sculpture to a kind of an anti-monument, as I've said before.
Exactly. I almost wondered if the grass served that purpose, to if somebody planted it to underline that fact.
I don't know if they planted it or if it's naturally growing there. And then, of course, there's crops and things like that. Obviously, it's a working farm. Maybe they just left it as natural. I don't know, but it was just so surreal.
Well, the next slide also is another one I have questions about, because this is not in the exhibition, but this is one of your other photographs from the series, and it's called the Normandy Wall. And I guess it does bear some resemblance to the fortifications the Germans built on the Normandy beaches. Is that why it's called that?
Yes, correct. So it's just gotten that nickname because of what it looks like. And this is what you call a vehicle barrier as opposed to a people wall. So the other walls, which are taller and basically opaque, or sometimes there's slats through it, it keeps people out. This one obviously can't, a person can jump over. In fact, I jumped over it back and forth to photograph it back and forth. What it does do is makes it hard for a vehicle to casually go through. It's less expensive to build. And usually you'll find this in more remote areas where a person isn't near a city. This would be, without function. But in this remote area where people aren't going to be walking and casually going, it's a discourage vehicles.
Right. Well, why don't we go to the next slide, Olivia? So I wanted to know if Guillermo could say something about this piece, the wall vibraphone, which is made from electrical boxes, I believe, that they have on the wall. Is that right, Guillermo? And tell us how you play this.
Yeah, from what I learned from Richard, that he picked it up for me, it's I think it was during the Bush administration, there was this attempt to put sensors into the body of the wall, into the metal body of the wall. And it seems like it was a waste of money, because all of these electronic silicone or plastic pieces melted with the heat. And obviously the heat transmitted through the metal. So Richard found this discarded, this part, and I found it really interesting, both in shape and in what I could do with sound. So I kind of cut it and made this vibraphone, these floating metal pieces, and I put strings in it. And it ended up being a very resonant, very beautiful sounding sonic device. it's very metallic, very deep and very loud. It actually makes a very loud sound. I mean, you don't have the proportions here, but it's about like 3 feet by 2 feet, something like that. It's not that big, but it makes a very loud sound.
Well, I know at the end, Sarah Linda's going to give information about a concert we're going to have later and everybody can hear the music. Why don't we go to the next slide, Olivia? So I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about, you shared with us when we were setting up the exhibition, you shared this score for the music and the exhibition. And I know it's based on the Aztec calendar. Do you want to explain a little bit about that to people?
Yes, there's 2 Aztec calendars. One is the calendar of the sun, that is 360 days. And the other one is the calendar of Venus, that is 260 days. 60 days, yeah, 260 days. So I kind of wanted to use the proportions. A week in this Aztec calendar, 1 week consisted of 13 days, and a month consisted of 20 days. So you multiply 13 times 20, gives you 260. But if you put parallel the displacement of the week towards the displacement of the month, it ends up being displayed like constantly moving in time, because obviously when you're in 14, in the 20, you're only in 1 in the 13. So it needs 260 days to repeat itself again. So that's I translated that into 260 minutes, which is the largest piece I ever wrote, which is 4 hours and 20 minutes. And it's in the gallery right now. And it's also a spatial piece. We discussed a lot how to make the instruments, the sound of the instruments or sonic devices, how we hear them, how to hear them. And we thought of having myself playing videos. We thought of several things, and we came up with this thing that it's kind of an orchestra of all the instruments, and they play in trios, in quartets, in quintets, all of them, as you can see in the score. And you'll never hear the same thing. Even if you're there 4 hours and 20 minutes, you forget what you heard 4 hours and 20 minutes ago. So it's definitely designed for a gallery space, or for being there for long amounts of time, and you don't hear the same thing standing in one part of the room than in another part of the room. As you get away from one instrument, you hear the other one louder, the other one's louder or softer.
Just to give people an idea, in the gallery, you saw some of the views before, there's sound coming out of every pedestal of that instrument. Mm-hmm. So in effect, they're all playing in concert together in the gallery. Could we see the next slide, please? So this is going way back for you, Richard. I wanted you to say a little bit about how you got involved in photographing the desert, because I know one of your very first projects was actually photographing people on the streets of San Francisco, or Berkeley, maybe.
Right. Before I do that, I just want to say something about that installation of Guillermo's. And I think I hope I've got this right, but I think there's 8 stations, which each one has these instruments that are found sculptures that are turned into instruments, and then the recordings. And as he was saying, you sit through it, and it's constantly changing, evolving. It's of everything in the show, including all my photographs, that is my favorite piece. It is so powerful. I could sit there for days on end. It's never the same. And it just keeps evolving, and it's an orchestra of found objects on the border, and it's really just so brilliant. Anyway, I just had to put my
it'll give you goosebumps, because many of the sounds are meant to evoke being at the border. At least that's how I take it.
Yeah, I wish anyway, see the pictures, you can't get that. So anyway, it's really great. In terms of this, this is early work. Before I began, this was work I did around 1975, 1976. Influence a little bit like Guillermo was from the Carlos Castaneda books. Guillermo and I are both coyotes. You can look that up. But basically, before I started photographing in the desert, I was really photographing on the streets of Berkeley. I did a classic street documentary of the street people, people living on the street back in that day. And there were portraits, and I shot it with a large camera, and I would have people look straight at me and photograph them. And I really thought, and I was 22 years old when I began, and I really thought people should see this, and the work would change the world and all that. And in the end, the pictures didn't really help the people on the street. They helped me. My career took off. I got an NEA grant. I got exhibitions. I did a book, and it didn't have the impact. And it was a time to do a lot of soul searching. And I felt uncomfortable photographing people at that point. So, and at that point, I was going from the politics at Berkeley from the late 60s to kind of the revolution of mystical literature that was going on, spiritual from the East. I was reading Ouspensky, Gurdjieff, the Castaneda books, and I decided to head off into the desert, stop photographing people at all, and just be with myself in the desert. And I began photographing at night. I photographed at night on Telegraph Avenue, which is where I did the street people portraits. And I learned the language of working at night. And now I went into the desert, and I only worked at night. I didn't work at daytime at all. I just made pictures at night for 2 years. And this series that I took a big handheld strobe, and I would set up the camera, and I would just barbecue these cactus and vegetation in the desert at night and just light them up. And they had this kind of mystical, metaphysical quality. I think the Gurdjieff book was In Search of the Miraculous. And so this was In Search of Cactus. I was out to look for cacti and just photograph their glory. And that's how that started.
Well, I think I have one other early piece, which leads right back into the current series. This one I thought was particularly gorgeous. And where exactly is this, the San Gorgonio Pass?
This is in California, not far from Palm Springs. And this was a shift from 8x10 black and white. And the picture you saw before, it actually is a toned silver print. And up until then, I was working in black and white, but with the toned silver print, I added color for the first time. I used toner to get what I call the split tone technique. So it brought a little bit of orange color into the silver, and it was beautiful. So that was my first foray into color at all. But this represents my very early start with full color. I'm shooting an 8x10 camera, color negative material. And this was, I think, in 1981.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
You look at the caption, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there. Yeah,
there it is. I like to put the captions on them because later on when it's, on YouTube or something, then all the captions are there. And the next slide you'll see is a very similar kind of landscape. And this is the cover of the book from Aperture and also the first image in the exhibition. And I think, and Guillermo will chime in and correct me, is this the exact photograph that the soundscape, which if we go on is the next picture, is based on? Or is it, oh no, sorry, this is another one at Tierra del Sol. If you could go to the next slide. Now the soundscape is inspired by Richard's photographs. Is it one of those two photographs, Guillermo?
No, actually, this is there's two soundscapes. I usually have two. I made two of each sonic device so that I can play one, and one is in the exhibit because there was liability problems in many museums. So I had to make two instruments, one to play and one to display. So, but this one in particular is based in the mountains that are more like in Arizona, because the other one is California, and there's another soundscape that looks more like that. But this one is more like I don't remember exactly which photograph of Richard I saw that had this kind of
it's a different one. I think
okay.
Actually, and maybe it was even in Texas, but there's a very specific, or maybe it's anyway. It was a different landscape, but
it's kind of hard to see in this view of the instrument, but there are slits in the hills which affect the sound. If we go to the next slide, I wanted to talk to Guillermo, although maybe he went away, about some of the sources. Because one
I'm
thing
here.
I was really interested in, Guillermo, is all the different sources of your inspiration, from Western music to all many different cultures. And according to Art Bridges, we have this illustration on the labels. And is this an inspiration for the soundscape?
Yes, this is an Aztec instrument, and it's called teponaztli, and it's basically carved wood, and it has two tongues in the top, and the carved wood acts as a resonator, and the top part of the wood is kind of a, I would say, I wouldn't call it a marimba, but it's kind of the same idea. It has two keys in the top, two tongues, and you play, has two tones in it. The slits in my soundscape, they have different sizes and they have more tones than this one, but this one has particular two tones.
Okay, could we see the next slide? So, getting back more specifically to work at the border, this is one that really intrigues me because it combines the sinister so much with the beautiful. The shooting range. I don't want to comment on this. I'd rather let you all jump in and talk about this juxtaposition.
You want me to talk about it?
Either one of you.
Okay, I'll say a little bit. It seems like Richard went into this shooting range. Somehow he got in and he found all of these empty rifle or gun shells from the border patrol. And there are hundreds of them, and there's several photographs. And what called my attention is the colorful nature of these. Being such a horrible thing, we're so colorful, and it kind of reminded me, like, what if I make a shaker based in the Cuban shekere, that it's a shaker instrument with the shape of a piñata, a metal piñata, and just make an instrument out of that, because of the colorful and festive. It's kind of it's ironic, only just like my own Mexican ironic humor.
And this is hanging. This hangs in the exhibition. In one of the initial photographs, it was hanging in the air. Richard, anything, or should we? I actually have a picture of I think it's a West African instrument it's based on, Olivia.
Yeah, the shekere, yeah.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the diversity of your influences, because I know you started by studying classical Western music, right?
That's
then
correct.
you were influenced by John Cage, and some of your instruments are based on Aztec origins, West African origins. Even in a minute, we have one that's based on a Japanese instrument. Do you want to make any comment on all these influences?
Well, as I started studying the music from the beginning of the 20th century, end of 21st century, there has been a lot in classical music and a lot of exploration in new sounds and new ways to make music. And from the beginning of the 20th century, there was a lot of interest in instruments from Asia, and later on, even like Terry Riley, Steve Reich, American composers start exploring, and Lou Harrison started exploring instruments from Africa, from Asia. And not only they add and complement the Western instruments, but they kind of add they have their own way of playing and their own universe, their own origins of where the materials come from. Just studying any of these instruments, you can have a lot of history behind the instrument of what came into that country, what the colonizers brought in, what was wasteful stuff for the colonizers and the people enslaved or the people subjected were using for making their own instruments, or how the Native American people were using things of nature to make instruments and to heal.
Okay, actually, there's something else I want to get at that might be in the next couple slides. Well, actually, this is an unusual influence that Richard was mentioning the other night. We should be sure and mention this is not in the exhibition, but this was in one version of the exhibition, and it's influenced by Leonardo Da Vinci, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it has the tire that is tires that Richard can talk to you a little more about that. Those tires, they drag them parallel to the border to smooth the land and to find the, 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 the footsteps of people that cross the border.
Yeah.
And then the targets are a reference to the targets that Richard found at the shooting range. And to say it to say it fast, Leonardo da Vinci created this mechanical instrument that is called martello. That is a
Yeah,
hammer.
I
It's a
actually have
mechanical.
it, Olivia, if you want to change the slide.
Yeah, it's a mechanical hammer, and it's a comment on the substitution of workers' labor into the workers' labor. So I did the zapatello, that is like from zapato, from shoe, and as you turn the crank, instead of hammering it, it
Right.
it hits the drum. No,
Well, I want to keep going because it's getting close to 3 and I know we have questions, but I want to talk about the effigy, which I think might be next. Nope. Okay, well, can we keep going? Oh, well, this was the one that was based on a Japanese kodo, the Huesi kodo, but I think we should talk about the effigies though.
Yeah,
All right.
I let Richard talk about the effigies a little bit because he's the first photograph, probably one of the, if not the first.
True, and then when we get when Richard gets done, one thing I really wanted to get at though was the sense of channeling the energy from the objects you find, because that was one of the musical instrument influences we didn't talk about yet.
Okay, so I'll just I'll start a little bit. These were made. I did a whole series of these in 2009. On the California border, I found these agave stalks covered with human, with clothing that was found on the border. And I don't know who did it. I did at the time. I think I know who did it now, but I didn't know at the time who did it. And this is right on the California-Mexico border. And there was a bunch of these, and I found them very haunting. And I didn't know if they were considered warnings for people coming across the border, or protests against the border patrol, or what the symbolism was, but they were very powerful. So I made these photographs before meeting Guillermo. But when I saw what Guillermo, and so these are like found sculptures. And when I saw that Guillermo was making sculpture, found things on the border into musical instruments / sculptures, that's when I knew immediately that it would be a great collaboration, even though he didn't know what I was going through my mind. But and then one day, and this will be lead in for Guillermo's instrument. One day, Guillermo brought to my studio as a surprise to me an instrument he made based on one of these effigies. And do you have the slide of that next?
Yes.
And Guillermo brought this to the studio and blew me away. And then I'll let Guillermo describe it.
Yes, I got a lot of this clothing, and I said, what am I gonna do with this clothing? So I said, why don't I make an effigy? So it's hollow wood inside, and I put strings in it in the part of the chest, and a long string, very long string, in the both ends of the hands, which a long string makes bass sounds, to have a very loud bass. But what is very important is the position. No, the position, I find it also in Leonardo da Vinci's human representation, and also is the position that you get when you get scanned in the airport. So it's a position of it's a position of, how you call it, of
hands up.
Hands up.
That's what I was thinking.
Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot.
How do you call it? Translator.
Surrender, maybe?
Surrender. It's a position of surrender, no? It's a position of, and it's also a position of opening up. It's a very interesting position.
Of victory, I think you said in one place. It could be surrender, it could be victory.
Yeah, it could be victory. So I found it very interesting, and it also covers all of our extension of our feet and our hands. You can draw a circle, and it's as far as we can go with our feet.
That's very Da Vinci.
Yeah.
I mean, I really liked the way you said, and not just particularly with this, that you're sensing that these objects that you found belonged to a person and that you can try to evoke their essence. I mean, I may be saying that incorrectly, but there's a sense of trying to connect with these objects, correct?
Yeah, there are two things. No, in the pre-Columbian world and in many communities, indigenous communities of northern Mexico, central Mexico, there's a belief that all we touch and all we go around in our lives is part of our ecosystem of life. So in order to heal somebody, the sound of the objects that you have can heal you because you're connected to those objects and to the sound of those objects. And I would quote oh man, I just forgot the writer's name that writes ethno-futuristic novels, but she wrote the tale of the sower's tale, or the sower's.
Is that Ursula Le Guin, maybe?
No, her name is
okay.
man. Yeah, but what she says.
Octavia Butler?
Huh?
Octavia Butler?
Yeah, Octavia Butler. Thank you, Richard.
Somebody put it in the chat thing. I just saw it. I read it off there. Thank you.
It was Louise.
Somebody
It
up
was
there.
Louise.
Octavia Butler. She says, God is change. What you touch, you change. And what you change, changes you.
Well, I think
my
in
favorite.
another conversation we were having, you mentioned playing the instruments, and there was a Western way to look at how you would approach making the instrument make a sound. And there was another way, a Mesoamerican way of looking at the instrument and what sound it might want to make.
I'm glad you
Am I
brought it
getting
up.
that correctly?
I'm glad you brought it up, because it's a good thing that I discover with this. When you're designing a musical instrument in the Western world, you're forcing the wood of a violin or the wood of a clarinet to make the sound that you want to get. In this instance, you hear the sound of the object and you adapt to the sound that the object already makes in order to create music. So you're approaching it from the point of view of the instrument or of the object, not forcing the instrument to do something, but you're allowing each object to talk by itself, to give voice to itself. Which is
Can I just add something? Because Guillermo's always said, basically what Guillermo would say to me is that you don't play the instrument, it plays you.
Yeah, that's true.
Good. All right. I think we have next, we're getting back to the issues of the wall, maybe in the next slide, if I remember. Oh, well, actually, this gets back to actually the very original photograph that inspired you, Richard, is the necessity of water for this crossing. Because one of the things that I learned from your exhibit is that the wall is more, the original wall was more built in areas where there are cities and where people might more easily cross, and then areas of the desolate desert, they felt that the landscape itself was enough of a wall, and then they have this water. So some of the instruments in the exhibition are simply jugs and bottles that you're blowing across, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one of the things that was interesting, one of the strategies early on for building the wall was the idea to discourage people from coming over, and by pushing it out to remote areas of wilderness, which were really dangerous, the Border Patrol thought that people wouldn't go. But in fact, unfortunately, people still go because they're desperate and they need to go. And there have been a lot more deaths and things like that. So it's actually had unintended consequences, because they really thought it actually discouraged people, but it didn't. And then of course, water is the critical factor, and you'll find these jugs of water. Sometimes they're, like you can see this one that I found, it's covered because the heat is so bad, the water will get really hot inside those, say, black jugs. So they would cover them, insulate them with towels or shirts or whatever they can do. And then often when the Border Patrol, like a lot of the humanitarian groups, put out bottles of water, and the Border Patrol will go and slash the bottle so that they're no longer functional, and leave them there as a message.
Well, I mean, the bottles, well, first of all, I found that so like, it made me so angry and it was so heartbreaking, but also the bottles really spoke to me because I think most of us have children have made these musical sounds on bottles. And so that spoke to me. Why don't we, we're getting close to time. So why don't we see the next slide? I think it's something we already talked about. We already spoke about the tire dragging, so why don't we move on? This was a revelation to me because we might think of the border being some of the slides that we saw earlier, but you were saying it just goes through some people's backyards.
Yeah, so this is in Texas, and again, most of the wall can't be built along the Rio Grande River because the river is always moving its borders, its natural borders. So a lot of times they'll build walls, and a lot of times it'll divide, American communities and American communities. And this is the case, just one of those places where they put a wall in this guy's lovely backyard. But you drive on the other side, you're still in the United States on the other side.
Yeah.
So,
actually, in the next slide, I just wanted to point out that one of the other exhibitions we have up right now is Librato Romero, From the Desert to the River. And he grew up in Calexico, which is featured in some of the photographs. And like we just showed a backyard in Brownsville, these are backyards, are yards in Calexico that were painted by Librato Romero and are on display right upstairs from the exhibition. Next slide. If you want to say something about this one, you can. I think this is the second to last slide, and the next one is just you and Guillermo at the border again.
just real briefly, this is place on the California border near the Pacific Ocean. And this is a wall, and you can see how it's meshed up. This is where the Border Patrol allows family members on both sides of the border to visit and meet. I think that's been discontinued under the Trump administration. But this was allowed, and generally, I just don't photograph portraits or people, and this was a really good example. I had the most amazing conversation with this woman named Veronica, a half hour. If I met her on the street, I would not know what she looked like because her identity is so obscured by this wall. And a lot of times you see children talking to their parents on one side of the wall and the other, and that kind of thing. And it was a fairly sad but very, very important place. So,
all right, next slide. Oh, well, this is also in San Diego, where it goes out into the ocean, right?
yeah.
This is one of the giant photographs, which is not in the exhibition. It's 161 inches wide. Why don't we see the next slide? I think it's the end. Yes, this is the end. And I think we're ready for some questions, if anybody has any questions. This is you all photographing each other at the border, right?
Right. Taking turns in this case. Yeah.
Olivia, are there any questions for our...
I had one question about the vertebrae for one of the instruments that Guillermo was creating and what animal it came from.
I mean, I'm not sure. I found that in a site where there was a fire, there were the bones, there were 2 backpacks and some other items. But I think from my experience in Laredo that it was wild boar. There's a lot of wild boar in Texas, in that area.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a couple of questions for you as well, Guillermo. So you were talking about how John Cage is a major influence for you. And, when we think of John Cage, for us music nerds, we think a lot of extended technique, you think of water walks, and you kind of see how his creating new techniques on instruments or using daily objects to kind of make sounds in this kind of more aleatoric way. Would you say that your work is an extension of that, or is it like more of a bridging of kind of 2 different worlds?
It's a bridging of the 2 worlds, and it's my identity-wise interpretation, my Mexican interpretation of that. if you see, there's a lot of comment in my work regarding contemporary abstract art. But it's very interesting because if you bring this abstraction and the object actually has a connection to a person or to a journey, that I'm reframing something that could be otherwise very abstract. No, I don't know if
Yeah,
making myself clear.
no, I definitely hear that.
And reframing abstract art into a more contemporary and more politically charged, socially charged um, uh, dialogue, no, or presentation.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I just kind of love the way that like you think about music in the same kind of way as these early to mid 20th century composers too, and continuing that, because there's so much music going on with set theory and continuing to keep things super organized. And it's interesting to think of things more of a concept and a way of a connection rather than just numbers.
Yeah, I like the fact that you. Oh, I,
Sorry about that. My mother, as usual.
I, I, I like that you're using the term extended techniques, which is a very, very interesting term for 20th century music, which is using a violin in ways that are not the usual ways to use a violin or a cello or a harp or whatever, no? And that goes directly to start using other kinds of sounds, no? Like approaching things in a different way, as I say, reframing everything again, no?
Yes, exactly. We have a question from Michelle for the both of you. Is the project ongoing?
I let Richard answer.
No, I mean, in the sense that are we continuing to make work? Not really. I feel like it's so interesting because when we did all this, it wasn't getting that kind of attention. I mean, it wasn't a certain amount in the art world, but it was once, the show and the book were already started when Trump took office. And of course, after that, it's really made people interested and aware of the issues there. But at the same time, I guess I would feel that there's so many people paying attention to it now. Our job is done. I don't know that there's, everybody's paying attention to it now. So we both moved on to other issues and challenges.
Great. Isabel was wondering, why did you decide to bring back Border Cantos after not being in museum for some years? Was it a response to the political situation in some way?
Well, actually, it's been exhibited nonstop since it opened in 2016. Mm-hmm. So at first it went to San Jose Museum of Art, Amon Carter Museum, then Crystal Bridges, then actually Pace Gallery in New York did a version of it. And then Crystal Bridges started this traveling show, which you have, but that's been nonstop.
Yeah,
and
it went to Amarillo, it went to Missoula.
And it's scheduled to go to other ones. Obviously, the pandemic has impacted a little bit, but it's definitely, it's not stopped, actually.
Thank you. Sarah Lindo was wondering if Guillermo could speak about the artistry of his scores themselves and how they're montaged with Richard's photographs.
Yeah, again, based in the late 20th century, start of the beginning of the 21st century, we start seeing music scores that go out of the norm, out of the five lines music notation that has been used since the beginning of Western music. And things start looking more graphic. So I'm very interested, especially in this project, in everything is a score. Your planner, your daily planner is a score of your life. Mm. Anything is a score, anything that is graphically represented can become a score. So I started using data that Richard was providing me from the earlier construction of the wall, from the colibri, from bodies found in the border, and I used that data, turning it into music scores. I used the flags that were thrown away, that were you saw earlier in the tanks, to print scores as maps. We were talking about maps earlier. About maps, a map is a score, no? A map is a representation of where you can move in a given space through time and displace yourself from one place to another. So I'm very interested in general in translating any kind of data into graphic scores and vice versa, graphic scores into sound.
With that being said, would you say that your works are like aleatoric or like chance works, or like kind of John Cage thought of his works, or but they are organized in a way too as well?
I wouldn't call my works chance, because it's if at the point that you're using notation, you're not leaving it to chance. You're actually, yeah, it's not chance, it's already there. I mean, the fact that it has a lot more open possibilities of interpretation is not chance, but it's more like openness, I would say.
Okay, and if anyone has any more questions, feel free to add them to the chat. Otherwise, Sarah Linda.
And I am here. I am standing by. We will continue looking at the chat for the next few minutes as we conclude. Olivia, thank you so much. And yeah, and Laura, and obviously Guillermo and Richard, thank you so much for sharing so much with us. You know, thinking about representation, mapping, landscapes as music and music as landscapes. The one thing you said about how you hear the music differently depending on where you are in the gallery, I think opens up a whole other area of sonic architecture in a way, and it really empowers the viewer and the listener in that immersive space, which I think is really one reason I want to invite you all, for many reasons, but I want to invite you to come and experience the exhibition for yourselves, if possible, if you can.
Yeah, and thanks to Luis too. We've had a lot of comments.
I have not even gotten to him. Yes, I mean, we talked about collaborators in conversation. Well, Luis is definitely one of our collaborators in this conversation. So we are so happy to welcome him into the HRM family, so to speak. And welcome you all as well. And I did want to mention a couple of upcoming virtual programs which will really build on this experience. You know, we have a very wide range of programming that we've put together to support and extend themes in this exhibit in Border Cantos Sonic Border. But specifically, I just want to let you know that coming up in March, we have Laura doing a curator tour, a virtual tour, again on Sunday, March 7th at 1:30. And so you can follow her through and sort of experience by proxy the exhibit on that day. And then one thing that Richard made reference to was the unique communities that have grown up around the border. And that's one of the topics that is going to be discussed in a program on Sunday, March 13th at 2 o'clock called Bridging the Wall. It's a panel discussion between Kenneth Smith Ramos, who was formerly the head of the Trade and NAFTA Office of the Ministry of the Economy of Mexico in Washington, D.C., and Enrique Perret, who is director of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, and our director and CEO, Masha Turchinsky, will be moderating that conversation. And then, what Laura made reference to earlier, you can actually hear a concert of Guillermo's work played on his fabulous sculptural instruments This will be a selection from his composition Sonic Borders 2 on Saturday, March 20th at 6 p.m. And all of these programs will be on Zoom. And they also will be posted subsequently to our YouTube channel, where you can also see a brief tour of the exhibit that Laura gave the other evening. That's up there, and I put the link in the chat. So I welcome you to take a look at our calendar as things go up, and visit us throughout the course of the exhibit, which is up through May 9th. I'm going to just see if there's anything else in the chat before we say goodbye for today. No, thank you.
I think just mostly a lot of compliments for our artists.
Yes, absolutely. And can I say what a pleasure it is working with our artists?
Totally.
Thank
Well,
you. Both
thank
so
you. We loved it. We're honored and thrilled to be part of this. And this was wonderful. So thank you all for making it happen.
well.
You are so welcome.
Yes, and
Yeah.
keep up that conversation, because obviously it is so creative and so wonderful and so spiritual. Thank you
Oh,
both
thank you
so
much.
very, very
Thank you.
much. And thank you.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm sure later, Sarah, this will